Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. Darius Caldwell had always been a man of few words, preferring to let his actions speak for him. At 56, his weathered hands told the story of a man who had fought against the current his entire life. His medical technology startup, Narration, began in his garage 15 years ago. An ambitious venture born from his belief that affordable neural monitoring systems could revolutionize treatment for seizure disorders. His wife, Vanessa, had laughed when he quit his stable hospital administrator position. "You're having a midlife crisis, Darius," she'd said with a condescending smile. "Buy a sports car, like normal men do." But Darius wasn't normal, and he'd never aimed to be. The son of a steelworker from Millbridge, he'd put himself through medical school working night shifts at a factory. While his classmates came from privilege, Darius's calloused hands had made him an outsider from day one. Their modest two-story home in Fairvale, in the state of Everton, had seen better days. The same could be said for their marriage. 28 years together had devolved into parallel lives under the same roof. Their 3 children, Daphne, 27, Julian, 25, and Miriam, 23, had all completed college with Darius footing the bills, even while the company consumed most of their savings during its difficult early years. On this particular evening, Darius sat alone in his study, reviewing the final acquisition paperwork. Medirex Innovations had made a seemingly impossible offer for NeuroShield after their latest neural implant prototype showed remarkable results in clinical trials. $40 million. The number still didn't seem real. "Dad," Julian said from the doorway, his expression impatient. "Mom wants to know if you're eating with us tonight." "I'll be down shortly," Darius replied, shuffling the papers into a folder. Julian lingered. "You've been weird lately." "Everything okay with the company?" "Just finalizing some paperwork," Darius answered, not ready to share the news. He wanted to surprise them, perhaps rekindle the respect he felt had faded over the years. After Julian left, Darius opened his laptop to check some final figures. A notification appeared. Vanessa had accidentally signed into her iCloud account on his computer months ago, and he kept forgetting to fix it. Messages kept syncing, including one from a group chat named Dad's Failures. His stomach tightened as he clicked it open, expecting maybe a momentary joke. Instead, he found 7 years of conversations, his wife, all 3 children, and messages from a man named Luca Moretti, whom he recognized as Vanessa's fitness instructor from the country club. "Dad actually thinks the neural monitor prototype is going to revolutionize medicine." Delusional as always, Daphne had written just last week. "Should we tell him nobody's going to invest in his garage science project?" Julian added. "Let him keep dreaming," came Luca's message, accompanied by a winking emoji. "It keeps him busy while Mom and I enjoy our private sessions." "You're awful," Vanessa had replied, adding a laughing emoji. "But he's been so obsessed with his failing business, he hasn't noticed anything for years." Darius scrolled back through years of similar messages. Every setback, every moment of vulnerability he'd shared, meticulously mocked. Photos of him working late in his home office, captioned, "The Failing CEO and Delusional Dreams, Episode 507. His hands trembled as he closed the laptop. The family he'd sacrificed everything for had been laughing at him for 7 years, while he worked 18-hour days trying to build something meaningful. Dinner that night was a surreal experience. Darius observed them, as if seeing strangers. Vanessa discussed her tennis lessons, Daphne talked about her marketing job, Julian bragged about his finance internship, and Miriam showed off expensive shoes she couldn't afford on her entry-level teaching salary. He realized he'd been financing not just their education but their lifestyles, all while they ridiculed him behind his back. "You're quiet tonight, Dad," Miriam noted, not looking up from her phone. "Just thinking about the future," Darius replied carefully. "About loyalty and consequences." "That sounds ominous." Vanessa laughed. "Is the company having problems again?" The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. now that he knew to listen for it. "You could say I've had a revelation," Darius answered, meeting her eyes directly. "Sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us." The next morning, Darius waited until everyone had gathered for their monthly family breakfast, a tradition he'd insisted on maintaining despite their obvious reluctance. "Before we start," he said, opening his tablet, "I want to show you all something." He turned it around, displaying screenshots of the Dad's Failures chat. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Julian dropped his fork with a clatter. Daphne froze mid-sip of her coffee, while Miriam's eyes widened in shock. 7 years, Darius said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. 7 years of mockery. 7 years of betrayal. "Dad, it's just jokes," Julian started, attempting a casual laugh that died immediately under Darius's stare. "And you, Vanessa," Darius continued, "with Luca, your fitness instructor. How long has that been going on?" "Darius, you're overreacting," Vanessa stammered. "They're just silly messages. And Luca and I. It's nothing serious." "Nothing serious." Darius scrolled to explicit messages between them, planning weekends together while he was at medical conferences, laughing about how he was too preoccupied with his failing business to notice. "Dad, we didn't mean," Daphne began. "Yes, you did," Darius cut her off. "Every word, every laugh, every mockery of my dreams and hard work. You need to learn to take a joke," Miriam said defensively. "Is that what this is? A joke?" Darius asked, his voice dropping dangerously low. "My working 60-hour weeks to put all 3 of you through college. A joke. Remortgaging our house to keep the company afloat. A joke." The silence that followed was deafening. "I'd like you all to leave," Darius finally said. "What do you mean leave?" Vanessa demanded. "This is my house too." "Actually, it's not," Darius replied coolly. "The deed is in my name. I've already spoken with my attorney. You have until the end of the day to pack your essentials." "You can't be serious," Julian shouted. "I've never been more serious in my life," Darius responded. "You all made your choices, 7 years of them. Where are we supposed to go?" Daphne asked, her indignation barely masking her panic. "Perhaps Luca has room," Darius suggested to Vanessa. "Or maybe one of your successful children can support you now. After all, my business is just a failure, isn't it?" He stood up, straightening his jacket. "I'll be at my office. When I return this evening, I expect you gone." As Darius walked out, leaving them in stunned silence, he felt no satisfaction, only a hollow confirmation of what he'd suspected the moment he saw those messages. The family he thought he had existed only in his imagination. 3 weeks passed in silence. Darius changed the locks, blocked their numbers, and instructed his attorneys to handle any communication. He learned that Vanessa had moved in with Luca while the children had scattered to their respective apartments Darius had been subsidizing without their knowledge. Those subsidies, along with the luxury car payments, credit card bills, and various memberships he'd been covering, had all been terminated. His attorney, Arthur Langford, reported multiple angry calls demanding explanations. "They seem to think this is just a temporary tantrum," Arthur explained during one meeting. "They don't understand the severity of the situation." "They will," Darius replied, signing the final acquisition paperwork for NeuroShield. The news hadn't gone public yet, part of his strategy. "About your will," Arthur continued. "The changes you've requested are significant. Removing all family members entirely is unusual. The court might—" "I'm not dead yet, Arthur," Darius interrupted. "And I've established the foundations and trusts exactly as we discussed. Everything is ironclad." That evening, alone in the house that once echoed with family voices, Darius reviewed his plan. The company announcement would come tomorrow, and with it, the beginning of what he now thought of as a reckoning. His phone began ringing incessantly the following afternoon, numbers he blocked somehow finding ways through. The sale of NeuroShield to Medirex Innovations for $40 million was front-page news in the business section. His family, who had mocked his garage science project, had just discovered that the man they ridiculed had become a multimillionaire overnight. Darius let their calls go to voicemail, listening to them later with clinical detachment. "Dad, I'm so proud of you." From Daphne, suddenly warm and enthusiastic. "Pops, we need to talk. I always believed in you." From Julian, "Daddy, please call me back. I miss you." From Miriam, and finally, Vanessa, "Darius, we need to discuss this situation like adults. What happened between us doesn't erase 28 years of marriage. Call me back." No apologies, no acknowledgement of their behavior, just the sudden realization that the man they'd mocked might be valuable to them again. Darius deleted the messages one by one, then called Arthur. "They've made contact," he said simply. "As expected," Arthur replied. "How do you want to proceed?" "Exactly as planned," Darius answered. "It's time for phase 2. Darius watched from his car as Vanessa and Luca exited the country club, laughing together as they headed toward Luca's ostentatious red sports car. 3 months had passed since the confrontation, and his family's attempts at contact had grown increasingly desperate. The latest development was a letter from Vanessa's attorney, threatening to contest their prenuptial agreement on grounds of duress, seeking half of his newfound wealth. The legal threat was empty. Darius had ensured the prenup was ironclad, but it confirmed what he already knew. This was about money, not reconciliation. Through discreet investigation, Darius had compiled a detailed dossier on Luca Moretti. The self-proclaimed fitness guru had a pattern, targeting wealthy married women, beginning affairs, then leveraging them for financial gain. Vanessa wasn't his first victim, nor his only current one. He maintained relationships with at least 2 other married women from the club, each believing they were his sole transgression. As for his children, their lives had changed dramatically without Darius's support. Daphne had been forced to take a roommate in her luxury apartment. Julian, whose finance career wasn't as successful as he boasted, had been quietly borrowing money to maintain appearances. Miriam, the youngest and perhaps least culpable in Darius's mind, had moved to a smaller apartment but seemed to be adjusting rather than scrambling like her siblings. Darius's phone buzzed with a text from Bethany Price, his former executive assistant, and the only person from Narration he brought into his new venture, Vertex Medical Systems. Meeting confirmed with Brookvale Health, 2 p.m. tomorrow. Bethany had been with him through the darkest days of Narration, one of the few who genuinely believed in his vision. Unlike his family, she had seen his failures as stepping stones rather than objects of ridicule. Her loyalty had been rewarded with a substantial bonus from the sale and a crucial position at Vertex, where Darius was now focusing on advanced medical training systems, a direct competitor to the simulation technology company, where Luca had recently become a sales director, leveraging Vanessa's contacts. Starting his car, Darius drove to meet Stephen Ortega, a former business rival who now controlled significant interests in medical equipment distribution across the Northeast. Darius Caldwell. Stephen greeted him at an upscale restaurant, his handshake firm. "The man who wouldn't sell to me 3 years ago. The timing wasn't right," Darius replied simply. "And now you want my help targeting CheatingWifeStories," Stephen said, cutting to the chase. "The same company that just hired your wife's boyfriend." "Ex-wife, soon enough," Darius corrected. "And yes, I believe we can help each other." Stephen studied him carefully. "This feels personal, Darius." "Business is always personal," Darius countered. "CheatingWifeStories' technology is outdated. My systems are superior at half the price. You'll make more money distributing mine. And it's merely coincidence that this would destroy Luca Moretti's new career." Darius didn't bother denying it. "Does my motivation matter if the deal benefits you?" Stephen laughed. "I like this version of you better, Caldwell, the ruthless one." He raised his glass to mutually beneficial vengeance. That night, Darius received the first direct contact from Vanessa in months, Not a call or a message, but her physical presence at his door. "You look well," she said when he answered, eyes taking in his tailored suit and the subtle changes in his appearance. He'd lost weight, started working with a personal trainer, and carried himself with new confidence. "What do you want, Vanessa?" he asked, not inviting her in. "I think we should talk about what happens next," she said. "The divorce papers, the house, our future. Luca and I." "There is no our future," Darius interrupted. "Only consequences for past actions." "Is that why you're trying to sabotage CheatingWifeStories?" she demanded, her expression hardening. "Luca told me about your meeting with Stephen Ortega. My business decisions are no longer your concern." "This isn't you, Darius," she said, attempting a softer approach. "You were never vindictive before." "You never knew me," Darius replied. "That's become abundantly clear. The man you mocked for 7 years was a caricature you created. We can work through this," she insisted. "Family counseling. A fresh start. The time for that passed the moment you created a group chat to ridicule me with our children," Darius said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." As he closed the door on her protests, Darius felt no satisfaction, only grim determination. The board was set, the pieces in motion. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as planned. CheatingWifeStories lost the Brookville contract, Bethany reported, sliding a tablet across the conference table to Darius. Stephen's distribution channels had already signed preliminary agreements with Vertex for the northeastern region. 6 months into his plan, Darius was seeing the first substantial results. Vertex's prototype training simulators outperformed CheatingWifeStories in every metric, and at a more competitive price. Luca Moretti was personally handling the Brookvale account. Bethany continued, a small smile playing on her lips. This was going to be his big commission. Apparently, he's been put on performance review. Darius nodded, revealing nothing of his satisfaction. "What about the European expansion?" "We're meeting with their representatives next week. If we secure their distribution network, CheatingWifeStories will be effectively locked out of Europe for at least 3 years. The systematic dismantling of CheatingWifeStories' market position was only one facet of Darius's strategy. Through carefully cultivated relationships with key medical institutions, relationships he built during his NeuroShield days, he was positioning Vertex as the future of medical training technology, while painting CheatingWifeStories as obsolete. "I received another call from Julian yesterday," Bethany mentioned cautiously. She was the only person who knew the full extent of his family situation. He sounded desperate. Julian had recently been laid off from his finance position, a situation Darius had quietly engineered by ensuring his son's mediocre performance received proper scrutiny rather than being overlooked. Also, this arrived from Daphne. Bethany handed him an envelope. Inside was a wedding invitation. Daphne was marrying a surgeon named Daniel West in 3 months. The handwritten note read, "Dad, I know we've had our differences, but I can't imagine my wedding day without you. Please call me. Loved, Daphne." Darius placed the invitation in his desk drawer without comment. His investigation into Daniel West had revealed a dedicated surgeon from a wealthy family. No knowledge of the dad's failures chat or Daphne's role in it. Darius wondered what version of their family drama Daniel had been told. That evening, as he worked late in his home office, the doorbell rang. He checked the security camera to find Miriam standing alone on his porch, clutching a portfolio and looking nervous. Unlike her siblings, Miriam had made no financial demands or attempted manipulation in the months following their confrontation. Her text messages, which he read but never answered, had evolved from defiant, "You're being unreasonable," to reflective, "I've been thinking about what we did," to apologetic, "I'm truly sorry for hurting you." After a moment's hesitation, Darius opened the door. "Dad," she said, visibly relieved he'd answered. "Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Miriam?" he asked, tone neutral. "5 minutes of your time," she replied. "Please." He stepped aside to let her in, leading her to the living room rather than his office, keeping a symbolic distance from his private space. "I left teaching," she began, opening her portfolio. "I've been working on something I wanted to show you." Inside were designs for adaptive educational tools for children with learning disabilities. "I remembered how you always talked about making medical technology more accessible," she continued. "It made me think about accessibility in education. These are just concepts, but why are you showing me this?" Darius interrupted. Miriam took a deep breath. "Because I was wrong. We were all wrong. What we did to you was cruel and inexcusable. I'd spent months trying to understand why I participated in something so hurtful to someone I love." "And your conclusion?" Darius asked, unmoved. "That I was insecure and immature," she admitted. "That it was easier to join in mocking your dreams than to face my own fears of failure. That I'm deeply ashamed." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect forgiveness, Dad. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what you were trying to build, and that I'm trying to build something too, inspired by you." Darius studied his youngest daughter for signs of manipulation, but found none. He still maintained his distance. "Your concepts have merit," he said finally, "but trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired." "I know." She nodded. "I'm not asking for money or support. I just missed you." As she left, Darius felt the first crack in his armor. Of his 3 children, Miriam had been the least calculating in the aftermath. The only one showing genuine remorse instead of entitlement. But his plan was already in motion, wheels turning that couldn't easily be stopped. The following day brought news that Luca had been demoted at CheatingWifeStories. Vanessa, according to Arthur's discreet sources, was growing increasingly frustrated with their financial situation as Luca's promised commissions failed to materialize. "She's been trying to access joint accounts you closed," Arthur informed him, "and she's pressuring her attorney to find ways around the prenup." "Let them waste their time," Darius replied. "Meanwhile, proceed with Phase 3. The annual Medical Innovation Conference in Chicago marked 1 year since Darius had discovered the Dad's Failures chat. Now, as he prepared to deliver the keynote address showcasing Vertex's breakthrough training systems, he reflected on how methodically his plan had unfolded. CheatingWifeStories was on the verge of bankruptcy, having lost most major contracts to Vertex. Luca had been fired 3 months earlier, his reputation in the industry destroyed. Vanessa had filed for divorce, demanding substantial alimony despite the prenuptial agreement, a desperate move from a woman watching her comfortable life disintegrate. Julian had cycled through 3 jobs, each ending when his lackluster performance couldn't be hidden behind familial connections. Daphne had married Daniel West, but Darius's absence at the wedding had raised questions she struggled to answer truthfully. Only Miriam had maintained sporadic contact, sending updates about her project without asking for anything in return. Her last message read simply, "I understand if you never forgive us, but I want you to know I'm proud of what you've built, Dad, both the company and the strength it took to stand up for yourself." As Darius adjusted his tie before the keynote, Bethany entered his hotel suite looking urgent. "They're here," she said. "All of them." "Who?" Darius asked, though he already knew. "Vanessa, Luca, Julian, Daphne, and her husband. They're all registered for the conference," Bethany said, handing him a tablet with their names on the attendance list. "Miriam isn't with them." Darius nodded, unsurprised. "They're hoping to confront me in a public setting where I can't easily walk away. Should we have security remove them?" "No. Let them watch." His keynote speech revealed Vertex's next-generation neural interface training system, technology that rendered CheatingWifeStories' offerings obsolete overnight. The medical community's response was overwhelmingly positive, with pre-orders flooding in before he even left the stage. As Darius mingled with potential partners at the reception, he spotted Vanessa and Luca watching from across the room. Julian stood nearby, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit, while Daphne whispered intently to a confused-looking Daniel. Darius deliberately turned his back, focusing on conversation with the chief of neurosurgery from Midford University Medical Center. Moments later, he felt a hand on his arm. "Darius, we need to talk," Vanessa said, her voice tight but controlled. The neurosurgeon discreetly stepped away, and Darius turned to face his ex-wife. "We have nothing to discuss," he replied calmly. "Dad, please," Daphne interjected, joining them with Daniel and Tao. "This has gone far enough. You've made your point." "What exactly do you think my point is?" Darius asked. "That you're successful, and we were wrong," Julian muttered, stepping forward. "We get it. You won." "This isn't about winning," Darius replied, voice low but intense. "It's about consequences. Actions have them." "You've destroyed Luca's career," Vanessa hissed. "You've cut us all off financially. Isn't that enough? You created a chat group called Dad's Failures and mocked me for 7 years," Darius stated flatly. "You laughed at my dreams, belittled my struggles, and cheated on our marriage. Now that the business you ridiculed has made me wealthy, you want to reconcile." Daniel West's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "Daphne, is this true?" Daphne faltered, looking trapped. "It wasn't like that. It was just jokes." "Show him," Darius suggested, nodding toward Daniel. "Show your husband the chat. Let him judge whether they were just jokes." "This is ridiculous," Luca interrupted, stepping forward aggressively. "You've systematically targeted me, destroyed my reputation in the industry." "I built a better product," Darius corrected. "The market decided." "Isn't that how competition works, Luca?" Security had noticed the confrontation and started moving in their direction. Bethany appeared at Darius's side. "Everything okay here?" she asked, ready to call for help. "We were just finishing," Darius replied to his family. He added, "I have nothing more to say to any of you. The time for conversation was a year ago, when I gave you the chance to explain yourselves. You chose mockery then. Live with the consequences now." As he walked away, he heard Daniel demanding to see the chat messages, Daphne stammering excuses, and Vanessa calling after him in frustrated anger. But another voice caught his attention, quieter, coming from a small table in the corner of the reception hall. Miriam sat alone, not with the others, a portfolio similar to the one she'd shown him months ago open on the table. She hadn't approached with the group, hadn't participated in their confrontation. Darius hesitated, then changed direction, walking toward his youngest daughter. "You're not with them," he observed, stopping at her table. "No," she replied simply. "I didn't come to demand anything or create a scene. I came to see your keynote." She gestured to her notes. "Your neural interface has applications for educational accessibility that I hadn't even considered." "I've been sketching ideas." Darius studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "I have another meeting now," he said, "but I have time for breakfast tomorrow. 8 a.m. in the hotel restaurant." Miriam's eyes widened slightly. "I'll be there." As Darius left the reception, he felt a complex mix of emotions. His confrontation with Vanessa, Luca, Julian, and Daphne confirmed they still didn't truly understand what they'd done. But Miriam had shown something different: respect for his boundaries and genuine remorse without expectation. Breakfast with Miriam marked a subtle shift in Darius's perspective. For 2 hours, they discussed her educational technology concepts, deliberately avoiding family drama. Her ideas were genuinely innovative. Adaptive learning systems for children with processing disorders, inspired by his neural monitoring work. "You're not asking for investment," Darius noted as they finished. "No," Miriam confirmed. "I wanted your feedback, not your money. I'm applying for grants next month." Darius considered her carefully. "Why did you participate in the chat, Miriam? You were the least active, but you were there." She didn't flinch. "Because I wanted to belong. Mom, Daphne, and Julian had this alliance. I felt excluded until they added me to that group. It's not an excuse. It's just the truth." She met his eyes. "I should have had the courage to stand up for you instead of seeking their approval." Her honesty resonated with him. Before they parted, Darius gave her his direct number, the first family member to receive it since the confrontation. 2 weeks after the conference, Cinexmed filed for bankruptcy. Luca, unemployed and increasingly desperate, began selling off assets to maintain the lifestyle he promised Vanessa. Their relationship was visibly strained. According to Arthur's sources, Vanessa's divorce demands had been thoroughly rejected, the prenup holding firm. With her lifestyle rapidly downsizing and Luca's promises evaporating, she reached out to old friends, only to find many doors closed. Darius's quiet recounting of her betrayal had spread through their social circle. Julian had moved to a small apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. His financial struggles were apparent. Daphne's marriage to Daniel was showing stress fractures. Daniel had indeed seen the chat messages and was struggling to reconcile them with the woman he'd married. Only Miriam maintained genuine contact, reporting small victories with her project. Her path to reconciliation with her father seemed cautiously hopeful. Late one afternoon, Darius received an unexpected visitor at Vertex headquarters, Daniel West, looking troubled. "Mr. Caldwell," Daniel began after being shown into Darius's office, "I apologize for coming unannounced." "What can I do for you, Dr. West?" Darius asked formally. "I've seen the chat messages," Daniel said. "All of them. Daphne finally showed me everything after the conference." He shook his head. "I can't imagine discovering something like that after years of supporting your family. Yet you're still here, building your new company. And you remain with my daughter," Darius observed. "I believe people can change," Daniel replied, "but they have to acknowledge their mistakes first." He hesitated. "Daphne is pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather in about 7 months." The news hit Darius unexpectedly. A grandchild, a new generation untainted by betrayal. "I'm not asking you to forgive her," Daniel continued, "but I thought you should know." He placed a business card on the desk. "This is the therapist Daphne has been seeing. She's working through why she behaved that way. It's not an excuse, but maybe an explanation, if you ever want to hear it." After Daniel left, Darius sat alone with this new information. A grandchild changed the equation in ways he hadn't anticipated. His plan had focused on consequences for those who'd betrayed him, but now an innocent life was entering the picture. That evening, as Darius reviewed acquisition documents for a smaller competitor, his secure phone, the one only Bethany and Miriam had, buzzed with a message. "Miriam, something's happened with Mom. She's in the hospital, attempted suicide. She's stable but sedated. I thought you should know." Darius sat motionless, the document forgotten. This wasn't part of his plan. He had wanted justice, consequences, not this. Despite everything, he'd spent nearly 3 decades with Vanessa. The hollow feeling in his chest expanded. After a long moment, he replied, "Which hospital?" 4 hours later, he stood in the hallway outside Vanessa's hospital room. Julian spotted him first, rising angrily. "You don't belong here," he snarled. "Haven't you done enough?" "Julian," Miriam warned, stepping between them. "Stop." "Why?" Julian demanded. His consequences drove her to this. "Mom made her own choices," Miriam said firmly. "All of us did. We can't blame Dad for that." Typical Miriam, always trying to get back in his good graces, Daphne muttered from her seat, though her eyes were red from crying. "Where's Luca?" Darius asked quietly. A tense silence followed. Finally, Miriam answered. "He left her last week, when she ran out of money and sold the last of her jewelry." Darius nodded, unsurprised. "How is she?" "The doctors said she'll recover physically," Miriam explained. "They're recommending psychiatric evaluation afterward." "I'd like a moment alone with her," Darius said. "What for?" Julian demanded, but before he could escalate, Miriam spoke up. "He's our father, Julian. Let him see her." Inside the dim room, Vanessa looked frail. Darius sat beside the bed, studying the face he had once loved. "I never wanted this," he said softly. "Consequences, yes. Accountability. Yes. But not this. He remained for several minutes, then rose to leave. As he reached the door, Vanessa's weak voice stopped him. Darius. He turned. She was watching him with heavy-lidded eyes. You came, she whispered. Yes. To gloat? She asked bitterly. No, he replied. To make sure you'll be okay. Why would you care? Tears slipped down her cheeks. You've taken everything from me. You chose Luca. Darius reminded her gently. You chose mockery over respect. I simply stopped supporting those choices. Her tears fell faster. I didn't think you'd ever find out. That's worse, not better, he said. Get help, Vanessa. Not for me, not for the kids, for yourself. Stepping out into the hallway, he found his children waiting. Julian looked away, arms crossed. Daphne met his eyes briefly before looking down at her hands, one resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Miriam stepped forward. Thank you for coming, she said. He nodded. She needs professional help. I'll cover the costs of a good treatment facility. Why would you do that? Julian demanded. Haven't you done enough to destroy her life? Ending my financial support was about consequences, not cruelty, Darius replied. This is different. As he walked away, he knew he needed to recalibrate. Vanessa's suicide attempt had clarified something. His goal had never been destruction but justice. Justice without mercy, he realized, could become something else entirely. The psychiatric treatment facility overlooking the Chesapeake Bay was among the best in the country. Darius arranged for Vanessa's admission and spoke with her doctors regularly, though he didn't visit. Their formal divorce proceedings continued, but he instructed Arthur to ensure she would have enough to live modestly afterward, not out of obligation, but humanity. 2 months after Vanessa's hospitalization, Darius invited Miriam to dinner at his home. She arrived with her portfolio and a tentative smile. I got the grant, she announced as they sat in his study. Not the full amount, but enough to build a prototype. Congratulations, Darius said, genuinely pleased. That's significant validation of your concept. Over dinner, they discussed her project's challenges. The conversation flowed almost like before, but with a new foundation of honesty. Dad, Miriam said as they finished, Daphne's baby shower is next weekend. She didn't want me to tell you, but I think she's afraid you'd refuse if she invited you. Darius considered this. Is Daniel well? Miriam nodded. Very. He's been supportive. He comes from a good family. And Julian? Still struggling, she admitted. He blames you for everything instead of accepting his part. He's working retail now. A big step down from finance. Darius nodded, unsurprised. And how are you really? Miriam looked startled by the question. I'm finding my way. Some days are easier than others. I miss how things used to be, but I understand why they can't go back. I'm sorry, Dad, truly. Not because I want your money, but because what we did was wrong. Period. Her sincerity moved him. I believe you, he said simply. The following week, a package arrived at Daphne and Daniel's home. An expensive crib with every safety feature, accompanied by a note. For my grandchild, Darius Caldwell. No attendance at the shower, but an acknowledgement of the baby, a measured step. Vertex continued thriving, expanding internationally, and developing new applications for Darius's neural interface technology. He worked long hours, finding purpose in the company's growth. 3 months later, Arthur called with unexpected news. Luca Moretti contacted my office, he said. He's offering information in exchange for calling off your vendetta against him. What information? Darius asked. He claims Vanessa wasn't the instigator of the Dad's Failures chat. Says he can prove Julian created it and added the others. Darius was silent a moment. Arrange a meeting. Luca looked considerably less polished when they met at Arthur's office. I appreciate you seeing me, he began. The information, Luca. Darius replied. No pleasantries. Luca produced a tablet. Julian created the group during his sophomore year of college. He was failing classes after telling everyone he was excelling. He started the chat to mock you before you could discover his academic probation. That's when he added Vanessa, then Daphne, and finally Miriam years later. Darius scanned the screenshots predating the ones he'd already seen. Theodore, now Julian, was indeed the creator, the prime instigator. Why show me this now? Because I want a chance to rebuild my life. Luca admitted, your systematic dismantling of Synexmed was brilliant, but ruthless. No medical tech company will hire me now. You participated in mocking me while sleeping with my wife, Darius pointed out. Actions have consequences. I never claimed to be a good man, Luca said, showing surprising candor. But I wasn't the architect of your family's betrayal. Julian was. After Luca left, Darius sat alone, processing. Julian, his only son, the child he'd placed the most hope in, had created the group, specifically to undermine him before his own failures became known. It shifted his perspective on the family dynamics, though not his sense of betrayal. That evening, he made 2 calls. The first to Miriam, inviting her to bring her prototype to Vertex Labs for testing. The second to Daniel, accepting an invitation to dinner with him and Daphne the following week. The dinner was tense. Daphne, now visibly pregnant, switched between defensive hostility and desperate attempts at normalcy. Daniel mediated skillfully. Eventually, Daphne said, I'm seeing a therapist. She's helping me understand why I hurt you like that. She placed a hand on her belly. I don't want to pass these patterns on. That's commendable, Darius replied neutrally. Will you ever forgive us? She asked directly. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Darius answered after consideration. It's a process. I'm here tonight. That's a start. As he left, Daniel walked him to his car. She's genuinely trying, he said. The baby gave her perspective. Julian, though, he's still furious. He's been pressuring Daphne to cut you off again, says she's betraying him by reconnecting with you. It matched what Luca had revealed. Julian had the most to lose if his role became known. The final piece of Darius's recalibrated plan formed. True justice required the complete truth about the chat's origins. Only then could genuine healing begin for those willing to accept it. 6 months later, Darius stood in a hospital corridor, gazing through the nursery window at his newborn grandson, Robert Darius West. The baby had arrived 3 weeks early but healthy, bearing Daphne's eyes and Daniel's chin. Miriam stood beside her father, her newly funded educational technology project off to a promising start. Her path to redemption had been the straightest, genuine remorse, followed by consistent action. Daphne's journey was more complicated. Therapy had revealed deep-seated insecurities that made her vulnerable to Julian's influence. Her relationships with Darius and Daniel were works in progress, but the baby gave her powerful motivation to change. Vanessa had completed her treatment program and moved into a modest condo Darius had purchased as part of the divorce settlement. Compassion, not obligation. They had minimal contact, the wounds still too raw, but bitterness had faded to something like sad acceptance. Julian remained unchanged, his resentment calcified into hatred as everyone else began healing without him. His refusal to accept responsibility isolated him further, especially as the full truth of the dad's failures chat emerged through therapy sessions. He's beautiful, Miriam said, watching the baby sleep. You're lucky, Dad. I know, Darius replied softly. Daniel West appeared, looking exhausted but happy. Daphne's asking for you, he told Darius. In the hospital room. Daphne looked up. Dad, she said. Thank you for coming. He's perfect, Darius replied, glancing at his grandson. I named him after you, she said. His middle name. I hope that's okay. The gesture moved Darius more than he expected. It's more than okay. They talked quietly for a while, the conversation easier than it had been in months. When Darius prepared to leave, Daphne caught his hand. Julian is planning something, she said, her expression troubled. He came to see me yesterday. Angry, I named the baby after you. He said, "You'll get what you deserve soon. I think you should be careful." "Thank you," Darius said. "I will." 3 days later, Arthur called. "Julian has filed a lawsuit against you, alleging emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He's asking for $20 million. It was desperate and baseless, but revealing of Julian's mindset. He was lashing out in a final attempt to hurt the father he refused to admit he'd betrayed first. He's also been talking to journalists," Arthur continued, "shopping around a story about how you vindictively destroyed your family after finding success." Darius had anticipated this. "Implement Contingency Protocol 5, he instructed. Full disclosure. The following week, as Julian sat with a prominent business magazine journalist, ready to spin his version of events, he was handed a thick folder by a courier. "What's this?" Julian demanded. "Mr. Caldwell thought you might want all the facts before your interview." The courier replied and left. Inside the folder were complete records of the Dad's Failures chat from its inception, showing Julian as its creator and prime instigator, plus his college transcripts revealing academic probation, and proof of the extensive financial support Darius had provided while being ridiculed. Sworn statements from Vanessa, Daphne, and Luca confirmed Julian's leading role. Julian withdrew his lawsuit the next day. The journalist, presented with this context, declined to pursue the story. 1 month later, Darius hosted a small gathering at his home. Daniel and Daphne with baby Robert, Miriam with her new business partner, and Bethany Price with her husband. Julian was absent, having cut contact with everyone after his lawsuit failed. As Darius held his grandson, watching Miriam demonstrate her prototype and Daphne laughing with Daniel, he reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. The family he'd once known was gone, shattered by the revelation of 7 years of mockery. But from the debris, something new was forming, not based on obligation or facade, but on truth, accountability, and genuine connection. The business he had built from nothing had succeeded beyond expectations. Those who mocked him had faced the consequences of their actions. Those willing to accept responsibility and change had found a path back into his life, while those who clung to denial remained estranged. It wasn't the ending he would have chosen 15 years ago, working in that garage in Fairvale. But as he looked at his grandson's face, the future now, Darius felt the hollow space inside him begin to fill with something new. Not the blind trust he'd once given so freely, but a cautious hope for relationships built on stronger foundations. The price of mockery had been high, for everyone. Yet for those willing to learn, there was still a future to build. Different, perhaps, but stronger for having been broken and carefully reassembled. Handing Robert back to Daphne, Darius made peace with the knowledge that some bridges, like the one to Julian, would remain burned. He had stopped expecting apologies from those unwilling to offer them, and learned to recognize genuine remorse when it appeared. For a man once mocked as a failure, Darius Caldwell had succeeded in all the ways that truly mattered, by standing firm in his principles, building something lasting, and offering second chances to those who earned them. And in the end, forgiveness and reconciliation were possible only when rooted in truth. Life, in its imperfect way, carried on. Justice served and lessons learned.